She cheated on me with my boss. But she regretted it. I never thought I'd be the guy posting a story like this, but here we are. My name's Jake, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had a pretty decent life. I had a steady job as a project manager at a mid-sized tech firm, a house in the suburbs, and a wife, Laura, who I thought loved me. Turns out, I was just another sucker. It started with a gut feeling. You know the kind, something doesn't sit right, but you can't put your finger on it. Laura had been acting different. More distant. Always on her phone, laughing at texts she wouldn't share. Late nights at the gym, even though she never broke a sweat when she came home. My instincts told me something was up, but I didn't want to believe it. Then came the slip-up. One evening, Laura was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have checked, but the preview message caught my eye. Can't wait for our next meeting. Last night was incredible. My heart pounded. I picked up the phone and saw the name, Mr. Donovan. Mr. Donovan. As in Richard Donovan, my boss. My stomach twisted into knots. At first, I thought maybe it was innocent. Maybe she was helping him with something, and it was being taken out of context. But deep down, I knew. I needed proof. Over the next week, I started paying attention. I checked her location history when she left for errands and found that she had been at a hotel near my office multiple times. I went through our bank statements and found a series of charges at high-end restaurants, ones I'd never been to with her. It all lined up. But the final nail in the coffin came when I installed a small voice recorder in her car. The next day, while she was at work, I retrieved it and listened. The moment I heard Richard's voice telling her how much he loved what she did with her tongue, I nearly put my fist through the dashboard. I was furious. But I didn't scream.
Amazing.
I didn't confront her. No, that would be too easy. Too simple. Instead, I smiled. Because now, I had a plan. Revenge wasn't going to be quick. It had to be thorough, calculated, and merciless. If Laura and Donovan thought they could humiliate me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. First, I needed allies. I reached out to an old college buddy, Mike, who worked in IT security. We hadn't talked in years, but after I laid out my situation, he was more than happy to help. He set up a keylogger on Laura's laptop, and within a day, I had access to her emails, messages, and even a few racy photos she'd sent Richard. The best part? She had no idea I was watching. Then, I dug into Richard's life. He was married, of course, he was. His wife, Ellen, was a philanthropist, always seen at charity events with him, smiling like she had the perfect marriage. I wondered if she knew. I decided I'd find out. A little social media sleuthing led me to Ellen's personal assistant, a woman named Claire. I sent Claire an anonymous message with a few choice screenshots. I didn't want to blow it all up just yet, I just wanted to plant the seed. Meanwhile, I started laying the groundwork at work. Richard had always been a bit careless, but I knew where to hit him where it hurt. He had been involved in some questionable deals, and with a little digging, I found the perfect way to expose them. This wasn't just about catching them. It was about ruining them. And I was just getting started. I wanted Richard to feel the walls closing in before he even realized what was happening. First, I anonymously forwarded some of his incriminating emails and financial transactions to the corporate ethics board. Nothing directly tied me to it, but the evidence was damning enough to start an internal investigation. Next, I made sure Ellen received a package at her doorstep, a flash drive filled with every sordid message and photo between Laura and Richard. I imagined the moment she plugged it in, her perfect world shattering piece by piece. But the real fun began when I set up a meeting with Laura. I told her I had a surprise for her, something special to rekindle our marriage. I booked a dinner at the same upscale restaurant where she and Richard had their secret rendezvous. She arrived, all dolled up, expecting romance. Instead, I handed her an envelope with printouts of her messages, hotel receipts, and even a picture of Richard entering a hotel room with her. Her face drained of color as she flipped through them. What is this? She stammered. I leaned in, my voice low. This is just the beginning. Laura was speechless. Her hands trembled as she clutched the evidence, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Jake, I can explain. Save it, I interrupted. I'm not here for explanations. I'm here to watch your world burn. Her lips quivered, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I stood up, left some cash for the bill, and walked out, leaving her in stunned silence. The next morning, the real chaos erupted. Amazing. Richard arrived at work looking like he hadn't slept. Rumors were already flying about the corporate investigation. I sat back and watched as the cracks in his empire began to show. Then, my phone buzzed. A message from Ellen. We need to talk. Now. The first move was setting Richard up for a public fall. Ellen used her connections to leak rumors about his financial misdeeds to industry insiders. Within days, whispers of an impending scandal began circulating. Meanwhile, I made sure Laura felt the pressure. Using a fake number, I sent her cryptic messages. I know what you did. Your lies are catching up with you. Each time, she looked more and more rattled, her paranoia growing. Ellen and I weren't just ruining their lives, we were making sure they suffered every step of the way. Then, Ellen used her resources to dig even deeper into Richard's illicit activities. Turns out, he had more skeletons in his closet than just the affair. Financial fraud, embezzlement, things that could put him behind bars. We compiled a dossier and sent it to the authorities anonymously. Meanwhile, I took things a step further with Laura. I hacked into her social media and posted cryptic, incriminating messages from her account. Messages that suggested guilt, deceit, and an impending breakdown. Friends and family began messaging her, asking what was wrong. She started spiraling. The paranoia was eating her alive. She barely left the house. I saw the stress in her eyes every time I passed by. Richard, on the other hand, was crumbling under the corporate scandal. News broke about his shady dealings, and within a week, he was forced to take a leave of absence. Then came the final blow. I scheduled a meeting at a high-end restaurant under Richard's name, inviting his wife, board members from his company, and a few select journalists. When they all showed up and Richard was nowhere to be found, they began talking. Speculation turned into certainty, and within hours, the story was everywhere. Laura called me, frantic. Jake, please, we need to talk. I let the phone ring. Then, I blocked her number. I wasn't done yet. The next morning, Richard's name was plastered all over the news. His company was conducting a full-scale audit, and an official investigation was underway. Stockholders panicked, and his net worth took a nosedive. It was a corporate bloodbath, and Ellen and I watched from the sidelines, sipping our coffee, as the empire he had built burned to the ground. As for Laura? She showed up at my house the next day, pounding on the door, tears streaming down her face. Jake, I swear, it wasn't what you think. I made a mistake. I opened the door just enough to look her in the eye. Oh, it's exactly what I think, I said. And you're finally paying for it. I shut the door in her face and locked it. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of their suffering. As I sat back, savoring the moment, I decided to escalate things even further. Laura had lost my trust, but now, I wanted her to lose everything else. I made sure her employer received an anonymous tip about inappropriate behavior at work. A few carefully edited screenshots ensured they believed the worst. Her job was on the line, and from the whispers I heard, it wouldn't be long before she was packing up her desk. Meanwhile, Richard's scandal had attracted legal scrutiny. Investigators were combing through his financial records, and it was only a matter of time before formal charges were filed. I knew the fall wasn't over. In fact, the best was yet to come. Laura's world was crumbling, and I wasn't done yet. After ensuring she lost her job, I went for the next phase, her reputation. I compiled a carefully crafted email detailing her affair with Richard, along with select screenshots, and sent it anonymously to her closest friends and family. The fallout was immediate. Her phone blew up with messages, some from friends trying to console her, others from people cutting her off entirely. The whispers at her gym, the cold stares at the grocery store, she was now the town scandal. Meanwhile, Richard was drowning in legal troubles. The authorities had taken the bait, and an investigation was officially underway. His assets were being frozen, his accounts scrutinized, and former business partners were coming forward with damaging testimonies. He had no idea who was orchestrating his downfall. Then came the cherry on top. Using a burner phone, I called Richard's personal number. He picked up, his voice raw with stress. "Who is this?" I chuckled. "You don't recognize me. Maybe it's because you're too used to sneaking around behind my back." Silence. "Listen carefully, Richard. Everything you've built is about to crumble. You took something from me, so I'm taking everything from you. This is only the beginning." He stammered, searching for words, but I ended the call before he could respond. Let him stew in fear. A few days later, I heard from Ellen. "Richard's moving out," she said, her voice triumphant. "He's desperate, and the press is eating him alive." "Good," I replied. "Now let's make sure he never recovers." Ellen had access to documents that Richard had been hiding, even from her. Offshore accounts, fraudulent investments, dirty money deals. We compiled everything and leaked it to investigative journalists. Within hours, the biggest news outlets had picked up the story. Richard was finished. And Laura? She was just beginning to feel the true weight of her mistakes. One night, I got a text from her, an unknown number. "Jake, please, I need to talk. I'm losing everything." I stared at the message, then typed a response, "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me." Then, I blocked the number. This was far from over. Laura was unraveling fast. Mutual friends told me she had been drinking heavily, spending her days locked in her apartment, avoiding everyone. The once confident woman who had betrayed me was now a shell of herself. Meanwhile, Richard was officially out of his company. His assets were frozen, his reputation obliterated. I knew he was panicking, trying to salvage what little he had left. But Ellen wasn't finished with him yet. "We have one last move to make," she told me over coffee. "We need to make sure he never bounces back." Ellen reached out to some of Richard's former associates, men who had just as much to lose if they were implicated in his crimes. With some well-placed threats and a few strategic leaks to the press, those former allies turned against him. Laura, on the other hand, had become desperate. A neighbor of hers sent me a video, Laura, sobbing outside her apartment, begging someone on the phone to take her back. I knew she would reach out again. And when she did, I would be ready. Sure enough, a week later, another message came. "Jake, I need help. Please, I have nowhere else to go." I thought about responding. Thought about meeting her, looking her in the eye, and watching her crumble. But then I realized, she wasn't worth it. I deleted the message. Let her suffer. Laura had lost her job. She had lost her friends. She had lost everything. But the final act in this play wasn't over yet. Ellen and I had been patient, meticulously dismantling Richard's world. The legal system had finally caught up to him, and an arrest warrant had been issued. Embezzlement. Fraud. Tax evasion. Every dirty secret he had buried was now out in the open. I watched the news as they dragged him out of his penthouse in handcuffs. His once proud posture was slumped, his face pale. His world had burned to ash, and I made sure he knew exactly who had lit the match. "He deserves worse," Ellen muttered beside me, sipping her drink. I nodded. "And he's going to get it." Richard's downfall wasn't just professional. Ellen had ensured that divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. She took everything, his assets, his properties, and his dignity. By the time she was done, he had nothing left but his debts and his shattered reputation. As for Laura, she had become a ghost of herself. I had expected anger, screaming, desperate attempts at redemption. But she was simply hollow. She tried reaching out again. This time, she showed up at my doorstep, eyes sunken, makeup streaked down her face. "Jake, please. I don't know what to do. I have nowhere to go." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "That's not my problem, Laura. It never was. Please, I made a mistake." "No, you made a choice. And now, you're living with it." She collapsed into sobs, clutching at my shirt, but I stepped back, letting her fall to the ground. I had wasted enough energy on her. I turned and walked inside, closing the door on her for the last time. And just like that, I was free. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath. The weight on my shoulders was gone. The betrayal, the anger, it was all behind me now. Ellen called later that night. "It's done. He's in custody, and the divorce is finalized. We won." "Yeah," I said, watching the city lights through my window. "We did. But this wasn't just a victory. This was justice. With Richard behind bars and Laura out of my life for good, I finally had time to focus on myself. For too long, my world had been consumed by betrayal and revenge. Now, I needed to figure out what was next. Ellen and I met one last time for drinks. "So, what now?" she asked, swirling her wine glass. I sighed, staring into my own drink. "I think I start over. Get a fresh start. Maybe even leave this city." She nodded. "You deserve that. But just so you know, if you ever need anything, I owe you." I smirked. "We're even, Ellen. We both got what we wanted." She smiled back. "Yeah. I suppose we did." After that night, I cut all ties with my old life. I quit my job. There was nothing left for me at that company now that Richard was gone. I sold the house, packed my bags, and moved to a new city where no one knew my name or my past. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't checking my phone for signs of deception. I was free. One afternoon, as I sat at a quiet cafe in my new neighborhood, I received a text from an unknown number. "Jake, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just want to say I'm sorry. For everything. Laura." I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Some betrayals don't deserve closure. I paid for my coffee, stepped out into the sunlight, and took a deep breath. It was time to move on. Moving to a new city was the best decision I had ever made. The past was behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. No more lies, no more deception, just a fresh start. I found a job in a smaller firm, something low-key that didn't remind me of the cutthroat corporate world I had left behind. My new colleagues were friendly, and for the first time in forever, I enjoyed going to work without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. One evening, while browsing through a local bookstore, I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she was everything Laura wasn't: kind, honest, genuine. We struck up a conversation about a book we both reached for at the same time, and by the end of the night, I had her number saved in my phone. Dating again wasn't something I had planned for, but with Claire, it felt natural. Easy. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't feel the need to relive it. We took things slow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt happy. One night, as we sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights, Claire turned to me and said, "You seem like someone who's been through a lot. But you're not letting it define you." I smiled, taking her hand in mine. Maybe that's because, for the first time, I'm finally looking forward instead of back. As the night stretched on, I realized something: I had won. Not through revenge, not through destruction, but by simply moving on and finding peace. And that was the greatest victory of all. Months passed, and life felt normal again. I was thriving at work, Claire and I had grown closer, and the memories of betrayal no longer haunted me. But one last piece of unfinished business remained. One evening, I received an unexpected email from Laura. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." I hesitated before opening it. Inside, she poured out a desperate apology, telling me she had lost everything: her job, her social circle, even her sense of self. She admitted she had been selfish, blinded by the excitement of the affair, and regretted every choice that had led her to this point. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just once, so she could apologize in person. I stared at the message for a long time. The old me might have entertained the thought, but I wasn't that man anymore. I closed the email, took a deep breath, and deleted it. Some doors are meant to stay closed. A year had passed since I left my old life behind, and I had never felt lighter. My new world was filled with laughter, new experiences, and the simple joys of everyday life. Claire and I had moved in together, and we were planning a trip to Europe, something I had always wanted to do but never had the chance. One evening, as we were packing for the trip, Claire found an old box tucked away in the back of my closet. Inside were remnants of my past, old pictures of Laura, a few notes she had written me, things I hadn't thought about in months. "Do you want to keep these?" Claire asked gently. I looked at the items for a long time before shaking my head. "No. I don't need them anymore." Together, we tossed them into the trash. It felt symbolic, like the final step in shedding the last pieces of my old life. That night, as I held Claire close, I realized that true freedom wasn't about revenge or closure, it was about finally letting go. And I had done just that. I was free. As our plane touched down in Paris, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. A year ago, I was drowning in betrayal and anger, lost in a cycle of revenge and bitterness. Now, I was here, with Claire, the woman who had restored my faith in love and life. We checked into our hotel and stepped out into the warm Parisian evening. The streets were alive with music and laughter, a world away from the life I had left behind. As we walked hand in hand along the Seine, Claire squeezed my fingers and smiled. "You look different tonight," she said. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter. Happier. Like someone who's finally free." I smiled, realizing she was right. I had been free for a while now, but being here, in this moment, made it all feel real. I wasn't just moving on, I was living. Over dinner at a quiet cafe, Claire asked the question I had been waiting for. "Do you think you'll ever hear from her again?" I considered it for a moment. Maybe. But it doesn't matter anymore. Laura is my past. You are my future. Claire's eyes shone, and she leaned in for a kiss. In that moment, I knew that every painful step of my journey had led me to something better. For the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And I wouldn't change a thing. As Claire and I watched the sunrise from the Eiffel Tower, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. The past no longer held power over me. I had let go of the pain, the anger, and the desire for revenge. "Jake." Claire's voice brought me back to the moment. "What are you thinking about?" I turned to her, squeezing her hand. "How lucky I am. How far I've come. And how excited I am for what's next." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Me too. A year ago, I thought my life was over. But in reality, it had only just begun. Laura and Richard were nothing more than distant memories, ghosts of a past that no longer mattered. I had found love again, true love, built on trust and honesty. I had rediscovered myself, not as a man consumed by betrayal, but as someone capable of happiness. As we walked down the streets of Paris, I finally understood, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's moving forward, living well, and never looking back. And so, I did.